7:30, haven't we? I'd like to call the general meeting open and welcome everybody to the Orange County chapter of the California Fruit Growers, and thank you for all attending, and hope that everybody is safe under the current circumstances. We've actually got or could have some international guests online tonight. Cheryl Backhouse from the Subtropical Fruit Club of Queensland, Inc., and also with the Queensland Bush Foods Association, Inc. So welcome to her and her team, and I hope you enjoy our presentation tonight. We've got a lot of things going at the moment. We've just finished, as most people will know, our online plant sales, which was very, very well received and allowed us to continue our scholarships to the Cal State, it's not Cal Poly Pomona ag people, and that's been very, very good. So at the moment, the chapter is in very good financial shape. So yeah, maybe John, our treasurer, will expand on that a little bit later, but yeah, we're doing quite well. The other thing is I've sent out a vote of thanks to all of our donors that provided plants for Green Scene, and which turned out to be the online plant sale. And we've recognized their efforts, and I'm sure that the mail, being as slow as it is at the moment, has reached everybody, and those that got gift certificates appreciated them. The other thing that's going on is we're looking in the future to try and sort out soil purchases and things like that that might help our propagators and our donors down the line as they're building up for our next year's activities. You know, we don't know what's going to happen at this point in time. We hope the Green Scene will come to fruition, but if it doesn't, we now have experience with online sales, and either way, we can do what we need to do and continue providing scholarships to those kids that benefit by them. The other thing that's going on too is, you know, propagation. You know, we're looking at building up our stocks, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to get out and meet and do what we did last year at this point in time. But Norm has a fairly large property where we like to convene and do grafting and do all sorts of things. So sometime in the future, we hope to get back into that scene again. Let's see, I think at this point in time, because we've been bound to our homes, not a lot of activity is going on out there. We've had our board meetings, and we're trying to do our best to push forward under the current situation, and it hasn't been that easy, but we're succeeding, and it's good to have Zoom meetings where we can actually get together virtually and communicate with each other. I'll hand over. Martha, do you have anything in particular that you wanted to say tonight?
No, the only thing I'd like to do is encourage everybody to keep planting seeds. If you have anything to graft and you have the science for it, go for it, because we want to build up, as you say, build up our supplies for next year's sale. Right.
Okay. And John, anything on the Treasury scene? You must be muted, mate.
Okay, here I am. I just wanted to welcome everyone to the meeting. And I guess all I'd like to say is that, you know, we're doing really well financially. We have a very good financial position. The sales have been really strong, and we still have some money still coming in from the sales. It certainly would be our, you know, from everything I've seen, it's the best sale we've ever had. So, but it just shows that we really will need the need for propagation in the future, because we really went through all of our inventory.
Okay, and I think based on yeah, the statistics that have been generated from the online sale, that'll help us focus on plants that sell well and command a reasonable price in the marketplace. So hopefully when all this is said and done, in the next couple of months, we can analyze that and then focus in on what we need to promote to you know, to help us even further. Turn to the committees now. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add before we hand back to Ty and to our speaker, Megan? And then we can proceed with her talk on Carob. I know that there was a survey went out. I actually have had some carob in unusual places. I was down in Australia in February before this COVID thing hit, and was up at Daly's nursery, and they had seed pods that were mature, and I crunched on quite a few of those during the vacation. So that's the only experience I have with them. So I'm be interested to listen to Megan and what she has to say about this chocolate substitute, healthy chocolate substitute. So open to the committee. Has anybody got anything particular that they want to say?
This is Laura with membership, and I just want to remind everyone that they can go to our website at ocfruit.com and go to join us to fill out the application to renew or to become a member, and send it to our post office box.
Okay, thanks very much, Laura, for the reminder. Yeah, those people that are visitors that live in Orange County, please feel free to go online and fill out the form. We encourage new membership, and we'd love to see you and help you out. You know, as everybody knows, we're a group of like-minded people, and we enjoy the garden. And of course now, you know, gardening has really reached its peak. If you talk to the nursery people, they've had record sales for this year. It's been incredible. And of course, our sales online have really been a witness to the increase in activity in people's backyards. So anybody else with anything to say? Ty, are you there now, mate?
I am.
Okay, well, I'll hand over to you, and you can introduce Megan, and welcome, Megan, and we'll look forward to hearing what you have to say on Carot.
Thank you. If I'd known you were going to Daly's, I would have had a shopping list for you.
Yeah, but I don't know how much I would have been able to bring back.
All right. Well, welcome everyone again. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Megan, for coming from so far away up in Davis. And so other Zoom protocols, so questions, we'll have clarifying questions to Megan. I can moderate those if they're specific to the content she just covered. If it's something that's tangential, we'll table that towards the end, if that's cool with you, Megan.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, we can do a little Q&A session at the end.
Yeah, and again, because of my controls issue, it's not like I can go into chat and see what people are asking in chat. I'm fine with questions coming during the presentation, as long as it's not at a clip that would put me over the time you've got.
Sure.
And as long as it's not too far off base, that's completely fine with me.
Perfect. All right. And I've got control in the chat window, so I can feed those through. Okay. So apart from all that, there is recording that will be shared on Megan on your YouTube channel. That's correct. And as well as our OC chapter with permission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depends on how much,
Great.
depends on how much Zoom bomb stuff has to be edited out.
We will do some editing, most definitely. And we'll see if we don't have any other incidences. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
So I'll introduce you now. So we've got Megan Lynch here. She's a master's student in horticulture and agronomy at UC Davis. She started her ongoing Carob research in community college, and her master's project is on epicormic buds in almonds. Between disability rights advocacy with UC Access Now, schoolwork, research, writing, and speaking engagements, she's working on launching a plant breeding podcast called Breeding Rainbow. Thanks so much for joining us, Megan. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. So normally what I do, and it's a little bit, when I was recording a backup version of this presentation, because I wasn't sure if we were going to have problems with the fires and other issues shutting down broadband and also just making it difficult to present, I was, basically talking to the machine, and I'd never realized before exactly how much I got from having the live audience, because I can see people's faces, and even if they're not speaking up, I can kind of tell if they're completely perplexed or not, or whether they're getting bored or frustrated. So it will be interesting to see. This is better than talking to the machine with no faces on it, as I was doing last night and the night before, as I was working on the backup. But it'll be interesting to see the way that my normal presentation style is affected by this way of doing things. But, that's one of the reasons I encourage questions, because, if I'm going, a little farther down a particular lane than this chapter feels interested in, it's better that I know and readjust. Oops, and let me turn my own AC off because you'll never hear me. Hold on. Okay. I was hoping that was not going to pop off again. Okay. All right. So let's go to the next slide. So the question I often get from people is how in heck I got interested in carob, because whether you're talking the gardening world or whether you're talking the horticultural science world, it's not a usual study subject. And so when I was in high school, I had a book, or actually I was even younger when I had this book by Southern California naturalist Christopher Nurgis, who in that book, he mentions that there was this myth that Seventh-day Adventists planted carob near schools so that students could have healthy snacks. I've never been able to find substantiation for that rumor, but just anecdotally, I went to a grammar school that did have carob trees right behind the playground. And I have memories of that, what that was like. And I'm sure anybody else who went to that school would as well, because carobs during, when they're in bloom, you will definitely know they're in bloom if there's a whole street of them. You will smell them. And even the pods when they're on the ground have a certain slightly different smell. Okay, so let me go back here a second. So in 2013, I went back to school because as you may have heard in the introduction, I am disabled, and I've gotten to the point where I needed to start a disability rights campaign because situation is that bad. And one of the things about that is that, most disabled people end up being really low income, and it was hurting my health a lot. And so as much as the normal workplace hurts my health, disability was not, the aid that I could get was actually just as harmful or worse. So I had to figure out what I was going to do that would pay well enough that I could live part-time on it if I could only work part-time. And I went back to community college in my 40s. And within the first semester, I did very well in botany, got a scholarship and a small scholarship, and was told, you know, that maybe you can make this work in plant science. And that immediately put me in the position of having to do all these background courses in it, because my bachelor's is in art. And general chem and general bio classes have very little plant content. And the chemistry in particular was extremely challenging. It was like, you know, crying once a week at least. So I was trying to give myself something that I could do that would help me keep my eye on the prize in terms of being motivated and going, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm interested in plants. The reason I'm doing this is that because I'd like to go to grad school to learn plant breeding. So then it was like, what could I do then? Because school, we don't have community college programs in plant breeding here. It's extremely unusual to find anything like that. And being low income, the nearest plant breeder I knew was way on the other side of the county, and it would require a lot of gas and their permission and time to study with them. And I remembered this carob tree behind my school, and I remembered this region is absolutely full of carob trees. So I decided that that's something I could do on my own budget. It's accessible. I can, you know, either bike up to it or go in the car and study these trees and just start from scratch, because CRFG had given me a background in fruit that was like knowing a little bit about a lot of species, but I didn't know very deeply about any one of them. And I wanted to change that situation. So I started literally with like a clipboard and a pen, going from tree to tree and just writing down everything I could notice about it. But I also started with a web search. And in 2013, there was a great deal less on the web about carob than there is now. And what I could find was people complaining about it as like, oh my God, fake chocolate, blah, blah, blah. There was a lot of that. There were complete myths that were based on certain Judaic and you know, Old Testament type traditions in terms of, you know, it would be like 40 years before a carob tree would become mature enough to bear, which is not true. That has to be a symbolic story. There were a lot of these, and then there were people also saying things like, oh, carob fixes nitrogen, and nobody was citing any papers that proved that. And so it was interesting to me that this thing that I knew was a very well-known species, in the sense that Linnaeus, who invented the binomial system for science, so the scientific name for carob is Ceratonia siliqua, and it has an L at the end of it. And that L stands for Linnaeus, which means that Linnaeus himself named the species. So it's been, you know, studied by European science for quite some time, or at least they've had the opportunity to study it. And yet there was so little information about it, whether you're talking, you know, reading about the, you know, the big horticultural books, or whether you're talking about reading scientific literature. So, but J. Elliott Coit's name came up a lot. And then also what came up is this book that's in the photo there. And that's a free PDF that you can download. I highly recommend it. It is the best thing available in the English language on carob. It's a really good introduction to it. So let me go here. So let's start with the basics, which is that it's a species that grows in, it's native to the Mediterranean area, and therefore can grow in Mediterranean climates. And those climates are marked out on this map. And as you can see, it's not the most most common climate there is. We're very lucky to have that climate here. It's what makes everybody want to move to places. You'll notice something in common with these places on the map. You know, they're very mild winter climates, and at least before climate change kicked in big time, they were kind of mild summer climates too. So, and indeed, carob is grown. I have documentation of carob being grown in all these areas, with the possible exception of central Chile. I would not be surprised if it grew there as well. It's just harder for me to tell from a distance, because one of the reasons we use the scientific binomial system is because gardeners were finding it hard to talk about plants internationally at the time in the early days of Western science, because the same common name could actually be used for 4 or 5 species. And when the Spanish colonists came over, they took to calling prosopis species algarrobo, which in English is translated as carob, completely different species. So in Chile, you would definitely have algarrobo there in terms of this prosopis species, but they might also be able to grow Serotonia there. So, as I said, pretty much the #1 thing you'll find if you search for carob on the internet is, comparisons to chocolate, but it's a species that had a long and deep botanical and ethnobotanical history in the Mediterranean before Europeans or any old world peoples went across to, what we call the New World, the Americas. And chocolate is native to the Americas. So for millennia, never the twain did meet. And they both have their deep traditions that are completely separate from each other. And in fact, the chocolate, as we think of it, really didn't come about until the late 19th century anyway. So I wanted to dig a little bit into what the traditions were in the Mediterranean, because I figured that's a way to sort of disentangle it from these sort of hippie stereotypes we have about it. So here's a photo of the carob harvest in Cyprus in 1954. And these are people sitting under the shade of a carob tree. I think the notes of this photograph said it was like 102 or something like that particular day. There's a little bit of glare on the photograph, but you can see there's this huge pile of carob pods there on the ground as they sit in the shade. So, carob does have this deep history. And I think technically you could only really consider it semi-domesticated, but in that semi-domesticated form, it's been known for quite some time. So on the left here, there's a recipe from the El Babylonian collection, which is of a lamb stew that has a carob base. And on the right is a painting from the tomb of Mena, where somebody's tending a carob tree. I believe there are also Egyptian like carob alcoholic drink recipes. So in this photo here, you see a man making what they call carob molasses in English in Dubai. And this is a type of carob product that's made a number of different places in the Mediterranean. So North Africa, Asia Minor, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, a lot of them are making this sort of carob molasses, which is that you take the pods and put them in the water, let it steep in the water. You break up the pods to do that. And then when you've got your, soaked carob water and you've soaked it as much as it's going to take out of the carob pods, then you start reducing it. So carob has a lot of different uses. You can eat it fresh off the tree. Sometimes I wonder why carob doesn't get the respect that I feel it deserves, and it might be due to the fact that it isn't a juicy fruit, and perhaps I'd have to ask the members here what those who have tasted carob off the tree, what they would think would be an issue. But certainly the seeds are hard, so you don't want to be chomping on those too. You would have to break the seeds out or be careful about them while you're eating them. And the pods are, the outside, when it's ripe, is not super soft or anything like that. So that can also be a little more fiber than people want to deal with. So in the days before we had sugar that came from sugar cane or beet sugar, your sources of sweetness in that part of the world would have been honey, which was reserved for the rich. And what other people had more access to would have been collecting wild carob and using that. And where you have sugar, you soon have alcohol. So it has that ability to be used that way. There's also a tradition of mixing it with other highly sweet fruits, which I can imagine. I mean, it's so sweet that it had to have been like a really kind of rare luxury almost. I mean, available to other people, but not something you would have on a daily basis because you'd get diabetes for sure. And you also have this capability of using it in savory recipes. And those are all things that, you know, when you see carob mentioned in sort of, you know, modern newspaper articles and websites and stuff, they will never mention those uses unless it's an ethnic American publication. It will almost only always talk about carob as a chocolate substitute, but clearly there's a long history before that. So I wanted to look at how these cultures use carob to give me a sense of what that history was beneath it all. So on the left, you see something called potitza, which is a Slovenian dish, although you can also find it, I think, in Croatia and trying to think, it's somewhere around a number of the Balkan countries, but the ones that front on the Adriatic Sea there. And it's a kind of, I mean, it's hard, like it's a bread sort of pastry thing, you roll it up, but that filling there is carob. They actually make potitza with a number of traditional fillings. Walnut is the most common, but they can even make it with tarragon. But carob is definitely one of the traditional fillings. And then on the right is a dish called spoof, which is made out of semolina and also is capable of being made without carob, but is often made with it. Here's an example of some more modern savory uses of it. On the left, it's again using the carob molasses as sort of a marinade, or not marinade, but like au jus. And on the right, unusually, locust bean gum, which is made from carob seeds and is a thickener, and also it can be gelled, sort of. They made a marshmallow using locust bean gum, which enables it to keep, you know, completely kosher and vegetarian. And they even put carob leaf in the accents of this dish here. So here are, again, savory uses of it, but more traditional. On the left is from Visit Cyprus. It's halloumi, which is a Greek grilling cheese that's put together with, again, carob molasses as a sort of savory, sweet savory sort of contrast in the food. And then on the right is a Greek carob pasta. There's also Italian carob pastas. On the left is a Maltese liqueur made from carob. There's actually quite a few different carob drinks in Europe. I haven't been able to find a single US distributor that imports any of these. So, and it's not that usual to find. There are places in Europe that will do mail order, but they just don't send to the US. So I've never been able to import this stuff. That actually inspired me to make, and I have a recipe on domestic punks of how to do a carob rum infusion, which is great stuff. I've had very skeptical people who thought carob sucks, and I give them some of that carob rum and it completely converts them. So, and then on the right is a carob juice cellar in Nablus. It's very common, especially during Ramadan, for there to be street sellers of carob juice in Palestine and also in Egypt, and I think to some extent also in Lebanon. So getting back to its history here in California, this is a 1920 Armstrong Nurseries catalog. And I went through, before this stuff all ended up online, I actually went to the Ontario, California Public Library where the Armstrong Nursery collection is, and went through their collection of old catalogs so that I could see the difference in the way this species was treated over the years, as well as the price difference. But, and at a certain time, it was treated as just sort of this landscape plant. And then it moves in the 20s into being sold as a fruiting plant. So it moves from the landscape section to the fruiting section. But what we always have to keep in mind, even though California fruit growers is interested primarily in fruit, is that it has enormous value as a drought-tolerant shade tree in this part of the country. Besides the first 1 or 2 years where you have to get it established with weekly at least watering. Once you get the root system established, at least with the kind of rainfall California used to get in the mid 20th century, it could live on rainfall the rest of the time. These days, it probably does need a little irrigation, but so little compared to most other species people are planting that you really get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of, if you've got limited space in your yard, having a tree that provides this incredibly deep shade at a time when we very badly need it, and it doesn't take very much water, and then on top of it you get fruit, that's great. So when you're done with the tree, when something happens and you lose a big branch or you lose a trunk, it makes this incredibly beautiful heartwood. And because, to my knowledge, there is no carob lumber industry per se, it's all salvaged wood, it's actually highly sought after. While I was doing my field work and I was sitting out there, I came right after chem class, so I was dressed in a lab coat still, and I had a clipboard and was sitting near the tree taking notes. And then, I was about to go back to the street where I was trying to take frequent measurements and observations of these particular trees. And I saw this guy out there with a chainsaw because the city had just raised one of these, 100-year-old trees, which is sad enough, but they had left enough of a stump there that the guy was determined to salvage it. And the neighbors had called the cops on him and everything. And he just sat there with he was really suspicious of me because he thought I was there from the city. And I was like, no, I don't want as long as the city's cutting the tree down, I'm happy to see you use it. I would have called you myself and told you where it was if I'd known your number. And they were using it in Egypt as well as a wood. Here it is. You can see it's very different looking wood, and it's managed to survive that long in that kind of shape. Carob, talking to woodworkers, carob is not a good load-bearing wood. It's twisty. So that's part of what makes it beautiful as an artistic wood, but you don't want to build your house out. So here the guy kind of gets around the load bearing part of it in a way by casting it with this aluminum here. And this is the most outrageous thing I've ever seen anybody do with carob. And this is from a salvaged tree here. And that veneer on that guitar is made from a former carob street tree. So another item you can get out of carob is locust bean gum, as I mentioned before. And this ad, dates, I didn't put the date down, but you can see that it's like, late 19th century, probably early 20th. That one's from the UK. Sizing is, if you've ever handled, a bolt of fabric or something, what makes the fabric stiff is sizing. So back in the day, they were using locust bean gum to do that. These days, they're using locust bean gum primarily in food. You look at the ingredients list of your ice cream, cottage cheese, yogurt, when it's sold in the US at least. If you see locust bean gum or carob bean gum as a ingredient, that's what that is. And this is the money crop for carob right now. As much as I prefer carob for the pulp, the pods and the pulp, what sells is the seeds. And so for that reason, there's no true breeding of carob going on, but those who are doing selections are making selections based on how many seeds it produces per pod. So hold on just a second. I wonder if I started some kind of timer or something. Oh, I forgot to start the timer, so I hope somebody's timing me.
You're doing great, Megan. Keep on rolling.
Okay. Now, I don't, when you get past the American era in California, if you want to do any kind of primary source research, you're going to have to know not only Spanish, but know Spanish from that era, which I do not. Neither have I gotten really access to those primary source mission documents. So I have not been able to prove to my satisfaction or disprove to my satisfaction that when they established the missions that they didn't have Carob. Carob isn't mentioned, but because of that bias that I said is already there with Carob, which you know, even for cookbooks or whatever, you know, you could look at Mediterranean cookbooks, and that the Mediterranean area has a millennia long history with Carob. Editors are making decisions about what to put in cookbooks and whatnot. And I think the same thing happens with secondary and tertiary sources on the California mission era. So they'll mention the mission grapes and they'll mention citrus, but they don't go, nobody's really mentioning Carob. Now, the mission garden that they have recreated in Santa Barbara, they've chosen to believe that yes, Carob was there. But I'm kind of, and I think it's super likely, but I'm still looking around for the source. But in any case, Junipero Serra came from Mallorca, which to this day has Carob. But the first time that I can substantiate something is I think actually there, if I look at my notes, there's I think one guy in the Santa Barbara area who was growing Carob in 1850, but 1854 is when USDA first starts importing Carob seeds. And the first batch came from Alicante, Spain. And this illustration here on the right is the rather ridiculous case of, I found the same sort of, it's almost like a PR release that USDA had. And so several different US papers had this same blurb about Carob. And I put this one in here because I thought it was very funny to see it in the Daily Wisconsin Patriot, because there's no way in heck you're going to be able to grow Carob in Wisconsin unless you've got a really good greenhouse and you can keep that greenhouse from getting too humid for the Carob to do well. In 1859, they brought in another source from Palestine, what was then Palestine anyway, and then in the 1880s, Coit mentions that the railroad companies, which are of course always looking to get as much free from the United States government as they could because they'd already gotten the railroad rights of way free from them, they get the free seed to plant Carob trees. And up and through the mid 20th century, there were quite a few of these old trees that were still left at the stations. So let's see, okay. That was okay. So here's an explanation a little bit about who Coit was. I kept running across his name a lot because the California Avocado Society, or the descendant organization from it, is kind enough to have digitized a lot of its materials and made those available on the web. But I'm sure some CRFG members must have run across them already because they had a subtropical study group that did early work on loquats and other as well, you know, other things besides avocados, including Carob. So Coit was headhunted. He's a guy, he graduated from Cornell, and he was working, he came out west because of his wife's health, which was really common for people in the late 19th century and early 20th. And he came out to the west on a field trip. I mean, he was already in Arizona, and they came to California on a field trip, and I guess they liked him well enough that they sort of headhunted him from Arizona. And so he started teaching at UC Berkeley when that was the campus pretty much for UC. He became the superintendent of the citrus experiment station in Rubidoux, which is a town that's close to Riverside. This is before UC Riverside was even founded. And then eventually when they decided they wanted to found UC Riverside, there was a lot of politics around that, but anyway, he ended up not doing that, and he went into his own business. He left UC and became his own consultant, but he was also a founding member of the California Avocado Society, enormously influential in the establishment of avocado, as well as other some subtropical and tropical fruits in Southern California. And what I didn't know was until much later, even like I was a couple of years into studying this, before I found out that he had mentored Paul Thomson, who was one of the founders of CRFG. And Thomson was sort of his right-hand man when it came to Carob, actually. Coit remained a lifelong booster of Carob. He was just convinced, as I've sort of become convinced, that people don't respect it enough and don't really see the potential enough. And so if somebody came to Coit looking for, to grow carob, he would send Thomson out to bud their carob in the field. So one of the reasons that Coit carob was adequately respected, I guess let me go back here just a second between that 1850-ish thing and what happened in 1920. Before you have major irrigation projects in California, before you have cheap and abundant water, people were doing what we should be doing now and what we should have been doing all along, which is, acknowledging the kind of climate we have and not being profligate with your water use. So choose the right species for this environment, don't waste water left and right. And in the early, in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, that's what they were doing. And so carob was pretty widely planted and appreciated, at least as a landscape tree at that point. And then what happened was in the 20s, you had a little bit of real estate boondoggling going on with citrus. And unlike citrus, though, citrus, there, that was something people knew what it was in the United States. They knew what to do with it. So even if it wasn't everything that real estate guys promised it was going to be, you could find a market for it. And Sunkist was starting up and all these other things that would help you market it. Whereas these real estate moguls, or not moguls, are really kind of grifters that were trying to convince people to, spend a lot of money buying these, what were supposed to be turnkey operations in carob. They took a lot of people for a ride, and Coit several times in his notes talks about how he feels like this really soured everybody on carob. And then what happens after that is that, we start moving in the post-war era into a sort of thing where the American style of gardening becomes having this suburban wonderland with lots of lawn and roses and things like that, and lots of water. And so the existing carob trees that were around were starting to get overwatered and weren't doing well. But anyway, so 1920, on the left, you have a pamphlet for F.D. Cornell and Company. That's one of these. There's several archives that have some of these pamphlets of these carob boondoggle companies. In 1926, El Molino Mills is founded in Alhambra, and they started, they were always about health food. They were always about health food. But as you can tell in 1926, it's not your typical hippie conception of what we think health food is. So they were doing flowers and things like that, but they were also doing carob flowers. So for Coit, for instance, when he started growing carob, there were no mills for carob to make carob flower powder in California, except at El Molino Mills at that time. So they set up a relationship of some sort. And in 1961, El Molino Mills registers Caraco as a trademark. Caraco is what they used for their carob flower powder, which was basically, like cocoa. You could use it one for one in a recipe that you had cocoa in. But they also started developing, candy bars. So you can notice here the name Holmes there. There was a large carob orchard out in Riverside County around what's now Lake Matthews, or what's called Lake Matthews, although I've never actually seen the lake. These trees, as you can imagine, nobody's been out there watering those, and they're still there. And I think that just gives you an example of how incredibly tough these trees are. Those trees are probably not getting anything much extra than rainfall, and they're still alive. And I just have this slide in here to let you know, I mean, that's something super valuable. If you can get a crop off of something that that can live in the kind of conditions you could see in that photo, I think that's pretty remarkable. So I knew that basically Coit was sponsored by a guy named Dr. Rittenhouse, who was the money guy. Coit and Rittenhouse went around the state looking to select superior examples of carob. So they found what is called Santa Fe, as you can see in the picture. That's the sign that's being held up. Thomson, I think, was the one responsible for finding that one, and he found that in the parent tree was in Santa Fe Springs. They did all that sort of stuff. They would go from town to town and they'd ask around if anybody knew of a particularly good carob tree, and they started collecting all this superior California seedling stock. Coit also went to the trouble of importing carob cultivars or everything. As I said, there is no real breeding of carob that's ever gone on. So even the things that have names attached to them, even the things that have been grown for more than 100 years in these various countries, they all originated as a chance seedling tree. It's not something that anybody ever bred, the mama tree to the papa tree. And I guess I should say here that carob is dioecious. So there's male trees, there are female trees, and then there's a really small percentage of hermaphroditic trees. Santa Fe is a hermaphrodite, so it's self-fertile. Although it will probably do better if you, anyway, so sorry, I'm getting a little distracted here. So Rittenhouse wanted to back Coit in this idea that they were going to have a demonstration orchard in San Diego County, and they were going to look around for the best chance seedlings in California, as well as import the best chance seedlings from the entire Mediterranean and test them. And they did that for 20 years. But Rittenhouse dies at some point. Coit is fairly old by the time you get to the end of that period. There's a lot of developer pressure on that land. So I think the orchard actually had already technically been shut down by the time Esmond Shade got a tip on it. But Esmond Shade went to UC Davis. He got his master's here. And he somehow got hooked up with Thomson, and Thomson, I guess, got him access, showed him where the demonstration orchard was, and he got access. And he basically went and took germplasm from every single variety that was still left there that Coit had. So it's not just the California selections, but it would have been access to all the Mediterranean stuff that was still alive there too. And he takes it all to Australia. Now, Australia, of course, already had some of its own carob. It would have, if people in Australia had wanted to do the same thing Coit and Rittenhouse did, I'm sure they would have found varieties there that, were chance seedlings from Australia. But by going to this test orchard, he had, and especially if he was talking to Thomson, he would have gotten a jump start in terms of which varieties were doing best here and, which were weak in which way and whatever. So phytosanitary law being not as strict back then, it seems like he was able to take all that germplasm over to Australia, and it really kickstarted an industry over there in Australia. So these are the selections that Coit and Thomson found in California. It's just part of what they did. I've done, before I went to grad school, when I was still going to community college and I could use my summers and other, vacations to go looking around for the stuff, I did go trying to track down the parent trees that I had rough locations or even sometimes an exact location for. And I was never able to find them anymore because nobody appreciates carob. And so people would cut them down, literally cut them down to make a parking lot. So here on the right, you see a grower in Australia, and what he's grafting there, as the article went on to say, is Clifford, which is something that was discovered, selected by Coit. And I'm sure it came from that Esmond Shade import. And here's a promo photo from Australian Carob Company. I think they've been around about 15 years. And again, they're not the first. Australia has, a history with carob that goes back, I'm sure, at least to the early 20th century, possibly to the 19th as well. And I know there are several other growers and orchards in Australia, but at least in terms of PR, from what I see from Australian Carob Company, as well as what I see actually get here in a saleable state from Australia. Australian Carob Co. is extremely successful in growing and marketing it. And part of the way they've done that is that in the Mediterranean, they're starting to change this, but traditionally in the Mediterranean, you know, you can sit there with a stick and you can harvest your carob, or you know, they are now starting to come up with shaking machines that can do it, or modify, you know, almond shaking equipment stuff to harvest carob instead. But there wasn't a lot of, you know, they wouldn't clean the product off a lot. There wasn't a lot of cleanliness to it, you know. And this particular business makes a real point of, yes, we clean each pod. And they say, oh, there's no GMOs. Of course, there is no such thing as a GMO carob. There's not enough money in carob to put into the research and development that would be even involved in developing a GMO carob. You know, so they sort of use the usual sort of like Whole Foodsy kind of marketing stuff. And it's really worked out well for them. And they've also done a lot of vertical integration. So he interested in having a mill on site, and they have their own production stuff on site. This is all stuff Coit would have loved to have seen in California. And unfortunately, nobody in the state really had an appreciation for it. I think the reason the Australian example is really instructive for us here in California is not only because of that very direct relationship that some of their germplasm, and I know for a fact that Australian Carob Company, even though they try to keep their cultivars pretty mum, I did once see a list of them, and they include some Coit cultivars that originated in California. But to compete with Mediterranean carob, Mediterranean labor costs are nowhere near what they would be in the United States or Australia. So you have to do something with the product to make it sort of value added. A lot of people, when they mention carob, again, there's the chocolate substitute thing. People don't have pleasant memories of it because they have parents who like forced them to eat it, you know, that would not let them eat chocolate, and they would like maybe lie and tell them that carob was chocolate. I think really the bad feelings about that ought to be about the sort of trust issues they have with their parent rather than carob, because my attitude is it's what you expect it to be. You know, if I'm sitting there making spaghetti sauce from scratch and I grab a tube of what I think is anchovy paste, which is what the recipe calls for, and it turns out that somebody switched the tubes out and it's toothpaste instead, I'm not going to be very happy with the way that spaghetti sauce turns out, because my expectation is not that I'm putting toothpaste in it, it's that I'm putting anchovy paste in it. And toothpaste is fine when you're using it as toothpaste, and anchovy paste is fine when you're using it for cooking, but you know, you don't want to mix those two things up. And so I see a lot of people's, you know, so-called trauma around carob as being more related to that, but I'm lucky that I don't have that. In the 70s when I was growing up, as often happens even to this day, if one or two scientific articles come out about something about food, you'll see a lot, you know, some medical discoveries, so-called, about food. There will be a lot of articles that publish that as established fact without linking to the study and all that kind of stuff. So in the 70s, there was this sort of run of articles that were saying acne is caused by chocolate. And so since I had acne, I started using my allowance money to go to the health food store and buy exactly the bars you're seeing in that ad over there. That ad is probably a late 70s or early 80s ad for El Molino Mills Carico product. And because it wasn't being forced on me, I really developed a liking for it. And when I was slinging Haagen-Dazs in Westwood, when I was going to college, among the flavors I was slinging was Haagen-Dazs Carob honey ice cream. I also had some Gilbert Brockmeyer's Carob milk when you could get that at the supermarket back then, and Tiger's Milk bars, which are coated with a carob sort of so-called, you know, chocolate substitute, are available to this day. And I know people who actually are big fans of it. But
I have an opportunity I can throw out there if you want to have like a quick breather, or if you feel like you're in the flow, we can keep rolling with it. But I have a poll set up if we wanted to ask a question of how many people have actually tried carob.
Sure, either way, I'm fine. I just want to make sure it's so hard because like everybody's muted, so I don't get that feedback.
No, totally. Well, let's have a just super quick poll I'll launch here. And if folks want to participate, it's a simple yes or no. We'll see how many folks have actually eaten carob. It seems like votes are tallying. We're at 40 something folks responded. We're at a 60-40 split about that folks have tried carob. So that's a good third of the group seems to have not tried it before. So they get the fresh taste buds to have an unbiased opinion towards how it is. All right, thanks for that. Feel free to continue on.
Oh, sure. And I'm trying to figure out, like, you're basically in control of my screen to some extent because it's so hard for me to see my cursor with the Mac OS client and the way it's handling this. So
Right.
The middle of my screen has got the poll in it right now.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, do you want me to, is there a way I can remove that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's...
If you hit escape, possibly?
Okay, we'll see how... I think it might take me out of the... Okay, there we go. Phew.
Okay, perfect. Gotcha.
Okay.
All right.
So carob is something that has been underappreciated, and there's been like a backlash to it, at least since, you know, the late 70s, early 80s. This is talking about the US here. I think people are slightly more nostalgic about it in Australia because I often run across tweets from people in Australia who have sort of fond memories of getting what are called, I guess, carob buds is what they call them, that they got from their school canteens, and they feel positively about them. But in the US and the UK, you meet a lot more people just kind of, they will literally use the word trauma about it. And because of that backlash, there wasn't much in the way of product development going on. But there's been a sort of renaissance of interest in carob, and a lot of it's being led by Australia, more than one business in Australia. But if you want to get them in the US here today, you know, up top there, I list carob powder from Bob's Red Mill. Bob's Red Mill has sections in a lot of supermarkets. Your supermarket may or may not carry the carob powder, but you can buy it online easily. Chatfield is another brand. Australian Carob Company, you can get kibble, which is the broken up pods. They call it kibble because the machine that extracts the seeds from it is called a kibbler. The powder, the syrup, and bars made with Australian Carob Co. are available from Azure Standard here in the United States. I have not been able to get my hand on this Australian product. You can see on the right there is Banjo, the carob bear. The company that came up with that actually has its own fields, and their fields, I think, predate Australian Carob Co.'s fields. And when the daughter sort of like moved back to the hometown and got involved with trying to help the parents with their business, she's the one who developed the marketing, you know, developed Banjo the Carob Bear and the marketing around that. And then up top there, you see Carob House Alfaroa. In the US, you can get carob chips by Sunspire. You can get them both with added sugar and no sugar added. I would recommend, my recommendation, my preference is to get the no sugar added because carob comes with its own sugar in it. And I think part of the reason people don't like it as much is because the kind of bulk bin carob that was available when I was younger, if you take something that's already sweet and then you add a lot more like palm kernel oil and a lot more sugar to it, it's just kind of gross. And you don't taste a lot of what makes it caroby. So if you do want to try something, I would recommend trying it with the no sugar added. And then carob molasses, if you are interested in getting your hand on that, you can of course buy the carob syrup from Azure Standard that is from Australia, but much cheaper would be to go to, if you were in LA County, there's a supermarket called Super King, which has really great sort of ethnic grocery items from a lot of different major cultures, and it will carry more than one brand actually of carob molasses. But you can also go to small Middle Eastern groceries and they'll have it. Oops, hold on just a second here while I try to select something because I'm really having some issues there. All right. So why would anybody grow carob? What's the point in it? It's pretty much edible straight off of the tree, really, which is nice. It's as I pointed out before, it's not the same as grabbing a peach. It is a high fiber kind of thing, but you don't need to do any prep to it, and it keeps really well. One of the things that I started running across as I started doing web research on it is that it has some, unsurprisingly, given that it's a Mediterranean fruit, it has a place in Judaism. And so I guess the Yiddish name for it is boxer. And so there are a couple of Jewish holidays where it's not uncommon to have boxer. And one of the reasons that it was a big deal earlier in the 20th century, when you didn't have a lot of refrigerated produce shipping, is that, you don't need to refrigerate it to ship it. So they could celebrate this holiday with a fruit that, reminds them of of the Holy Land. And nobody had, it's not going to come the worse for wear. There's nothing about shipping it that damages it. There's no such thing as bruised carob. If you live in a neighborhood, as certainly I have several times in my life, where if you try to grow anything edible in the front yard, not only are you going to have theft problems, but you'll probably have some vandalism problems in terms of like people who aren't very good at harvesting it and will therefore kind of rip up the whole tree. You've got a nice stealth edible, because most Americans still don't really know what they're looking at when they're looking at a carob tree. It has this beautiful foliage. I love a lot of times the trunks look amazing. If you leave carob alone, if you plant a seed and let it grow on its own, it's going to grow in a bush form. The carob that you see as landscape trees or street trees has been trimmed to be that way. But you can even trim it as a hedge. And in fact, I've seen that several times in my field work. I've seen things where it sort of accidentally ended up a hedge because it volunteered inside a hedge and was getting trimmed every week like everything else. Or I've seen it where it's been on purpose turned into a hedge. And that's kind of nice too. Feijoa is like that too. Feijoa is a really nice it's sold primarily as a landscape plant to most people, but you can get flowers and fruit off of it too. Really long-lived plant, as long as you don't kill it with kindness, because that's really the problem. It's not that it dies from neglect. It dies actually from way too much water and way too much, if you start treating it like wimpier plants. So why is it a big deal now? Well, as we're experiencing right now with this sort of watch for rolling blackouts and stuff like this, I'm about to turn 55, so I've lived through some of these changes myself, and I can definitely tell you it is hotter than it used to be. We are hotter for more months of the year, and the heat is more intense. And carob can take it. Carob can go up even to the triple digits sometimes, although I can't swear that you're always going to get a good crop under those conditions, but it won't kill the plant. And I guess I should mention at this point that it will also take down to, there's a little seedling variation in this, but it can take down to about 20, I think, and not be killed. So we have, cities and counties and developers that are very short-term thinkers. And if somebody even tells them anything negative about a tree, they're likely, especially when developers do it, they're likely to cut it down. And in fact, a lot of businesses and developers, because they know cities are doing such a bad job of taking care of their trees, a lot of developers and businesses will just, cut down public trees, and they just, they're waiting for the wrist slap, right? So we're losing a lot of these huge trees that provide a lot of shade just as we need them most. And there was a study that came out of USC Dornsife in 2017 that showed in LA County over a period of, I think they looked at only a 10-year period or something. It may have been as little as 10 years. And certainly I was seeing this. I started my studies in 2013, and really I was seeing it in epic amounts. Various parts of LA County lost from 14% to 55% of their tree cover. And they were studying the private property. while I was observing it happening on public property. And the reason it's happening on the private property is because as people in the rich neighborhoods, what's happening, and these have traditionally have been the ones with better tree cover. And what it happens is you have a lot of these really nouveau riche people, or you have developers who want to maximize things, and they get rid of the setbacks. They build all the way as close to the pavement as they can, and they're cutting down all the mature trees on the way to doing that. And so while I was witnessing a lot of loss of mature public trees, there's a simultaneous loss of mature private trees. And there's that, statistic there. Shocking. The street that I visited the most out of my study, because it was closest to home, it was on the way to the errands I had to do anyway. So I had my most observations on that street. And there were 11 carob trees that were cut down in just this was on this one street, but actually it was on I think about a 2 or 3 block area, really. It was that concentrated. And my study was about to learn as much about this species as I could. I didn't know that I was going to end up inadvertently learning a lot about street trees, street tree policy, and things like that. If I'd known that, I think I would have taken temperature readings under the canopies of these trees when I started, because I didn't realize until afterwards that if I'd taken those measurements, I could have made a comparison after 11 mature street trees are cut down and measure how much hotter the neighborhood was, because I can tell you it was. So here's my old grammar school again, and it's a good thing I took the photo and made the observations when I could, because within a year, couple of years, this whole street used to be entirely carob trees once upon a time, and it's just losing them one by one by one. A lot
Megan,
of times.
There's a clarifying question about the reason that was given for the tree removal.
In which case?
I guess any of these trees that you've mentioned, would that be for specific reasons?
They don't usually tell you, and this is, again, I could almost do a whole separate study if I weren't trying to focus on plant breeding, because this is considered more of an environmental horticultural issue. But and it could differ by city, but at least in my hometown, there are no publicly available, they don't have a tree pathologist give them a report, okay? There's no publicly available report on what's the reason they're doing this. And in fact, as a result of the effects of Prop 13 and other things that affected funding for, things we consider basic things that city government and county government do, which is, street trees are really basic. Street tree provision and maintenance is a really basic part of good government, and gradually over time, they were cutting budgets. And so they had to, the budget was cut on them, so they had to cut. And you will see that very few cities have what used to be really common with cities, which is that cities used to have a tree superintendent whose entire job was to take care of the trees. And these people were people who, were botanists and arborists and really studied this stuff. Most places in California now contract out to something like a WCA. And if you look at job ads for WCA for people who do this, when they put an ad for an arborist, they don't ask for somebody who's certified in that sort of thing. They're really asking, how are you with big equipment? So when you have that going on, you don't have people who know the difference between these different species and how to prune differently for the different species and all that sort of stuff. So it's hard to trust when you get a flyer like that says this tree's coming down. You don't know the reason why it's necessarily going to be happening. Sorry, just gotta just a little distracted again. And I did try to find out. I called the number, I emailed the thing that was on that, and they just never bothered responding to me. And I would imagine that's a fairly common occurrence. So I don't know. I do know in this case, from observations I made, as I told you, you can see here, if you look at this picture, you can see they've put some rocks up next to the tree. Those weren't there when I was a kid. And there's all this green grass there, which means they're watering it. In fact, oftentimes I'd find standing water there, which is really terrible for carob. So that's going to encourage the root rot. That's going to encourage growth of fungus. And once you get anything like that going in a way where it endangers the structural integrity, or they're worried about something, then the tree's gone, you know. But it doesn't always have to be that. I mean, when I was living down there, you know, there were notices of, there was a developer who wanted to grow something, and it just started whining about these, you know, really beautiful, mature, super cooling Ficus microcarpa, which were not a great species to plant there if they'd been planted later, but I suspect that the trees actually predated the businesses they were next to. And they just complained to the city about it, and the city cut them down. So that's, it's a complex issue. Sometimes there's really good reasons to do it, and obviously there's a danger to the public if you're not taking care of your street trees. But the fact is that most of the people who are making these decisions are not deeply educated on trees, and they're certainly not educated in the difference from species to species. And as I said, carob is something that, in my experience, when I first started looking at it, it was not easy for me to find a lot of good substantiated information on it. So even if they'd been looking for it, they would have had to, you know, they would have had to been dedicated enough to look a little further. But you can see there, I guess the point of this slide was not only to see these things are disappearing at a big clip, but you can see that there's a lot of hardscape there. There's asphalt, there's concrete, all that stuff. When you get these, you know, 105, 106, 111 temperatures, that's reflecting all that heat up. So that neighborhood becomes much, much hotter than it used to be when these trees were there, providing shade and oxygen and fixing carbon. So getting to the, you know, sort of theme of the presentation is how disrespected it is. Most botanical gardens I've ever looked into don't have a carob specimen. It's not really mentioned in most horticultural books. On the right here is a screenshot of Durr's Encyclopedia of Trees and Shrubs. And that, at the time, had just come out, and you can see on the electrical, the ebook or whatever book preview version, I went looking for, does it have carob in there? And it doesn't. And I was a little disgusted with that, because Durr is extremely, he's like the Bible for, you know, arboriculture, tree horticulture. His previous book, I think it was a manual of woody plants. I wasn't surprised to not see carob in there, because his focus is on the US Southeast, which carob is not well suited to. But when you put something out that just says Encyclopedia of Trees and Shrubs, you're no longer regional, you know? And so I just wanted to prove there that even something that's considered a Bible of trees and shrubs, it's not in there. Coit, when he got to the end of his carob demonstration garden, he chose his 8 or 9 best varieties, and he donated the germplasm to USDA. He donated it to UC Riverside, the San Diego Botanical Garden, and I think maybe one other place. I'm just not recalling it offhand. I checked all of those places to see if the germplasm still existed, and it didn't. USDA got rid of it. UC Riverside cut them down to build some car parking, and San Diego Botanical Garden didn't get rid of it per se, but was kind of neglecting it, and so it went down in a storm, the last of it. USDA has no carob accessions whatsoever, except for what it sort of lists on GRIN, which are 2 accessions that USDA isn't even holding themselves. They're held by the Desert Legume Project. And I don't think they're being renewed. They're not being, you know, if you're holding seeds in your germplasm repository, you have to keep germinating the seed and recollecting, or else the, you know, carob seeds will last a lot longer than other kinds of seeds. But if you're not keeping them in Svalbard or something, they're not going to last forever. as we have more trouble with water issues, a lot of cities are providing a list where homeowners and the city itself even can only replace out of a list of like, for 15 plants species that are approved for this. Carob's not on those lists, even though it's incredibly well suited to our environment, and particularly now. And then the last being, even when CRFG had a year of drought tolerant fruit, I emailed them and I say, hey, I'd be happy to present on Carob, and nobody ever bothered responding to me. So I don't know what to say. If you can hardly get more drought tolerant as a fruit than Carob, the only thing that might possibly be more would be various Cactaceae fruit, but they had no interest in it. So if CRFG doesn't have interest in it, you can imagine how disrespected this fruit is. So let's get to the practical items that people who are growing it might be interested in. As I mentioned, it's dioecious. I didn't bother providing a photograph here of what the male flower looks like, because it's in the diagram there, and it looks very similar to the hermaphrodite. At a distance, when you can sex Carobs, they're very difficult to sex out of season. But when it's in season, up top is what the female looks like there, and even that can differ. I mean, the color of them, the length of the pistils, the length of the racemes, they all differ somewhat. On the bottom is a hermaphrodite, and you can see that some of those pistils have been fertilized and are starting to lengthen into pods. But you can also see the stamens that are starting to fade with as the raceme gets fully pollinated. So Carobs are blooming. They have a pretty long bloom season, but around August through like October is more normal. I actually have seen some that bloom out of season, but it's usually because something funky is going on. On the right is a diagram by Christiane Hasselberg, who's made this sort of system for rating exactly how far along Carob is in its bloom cycle. And the reason you can break it down like that is because, as I said, it can take a really long time for the flower to fully develop, and that's just for the individual flowers. For the tree itself, it's also sort of spread out. So it could be a whole month or so that but I guess what I should say, I don't have it written in text on the slides, so I have to remind myself, but one of the questions I wanted to go into when I was making these observations was that you often hear complaints about the way that Carob smells when it's blooming. And again, it's sort of this, I think it's, one of these things that people tend to repeat without any substantiation. People say, oh, it smells like semen. And it's like, no dude I've ever been with smells like that. So I don't know why they're saying that, but I wanted to try to figure out, is there a different smell between the female versus the hermaphrodite versus the male? Is the plant smelling the entire time that it's blooming? And I can tell you for sure, it does not smell the entire time it's blooming. Even though the trees themselves have a long bloom season, I find that smell, at least in terms of its the real most intense part of it, lasts maybe a week, while the whole tree itself will take a whole month getting through with blooming. But I haven't been able to do the kind of quantification of that. I just wanted to say that, again, it's one of these things that's sort of overblown. And despite the, people saying, oh, it smells like semen or whatever, and you would think if that were the case, maybe the male flowers are smelling more than the female flowers. They're not. And I have not, again, I haven't quantified it, but I think it really varies by the seedling more than by the sex per se. So if you're interested in propagating from seed, it's one of these things you have to scarify. And so you can start off by scarifying it mechanically by, nicking the seed coat with a nickel file or a knife, and you can use hot water. You should use hot water to further scarify it. You don't need to be, unless the seeds are super fresh, I would say you don't need to be worried about using boiling water on it. In fact, I did, because the pods I was harvesting were maybe, already a year old by the time I harvested them. And I even put more than one, I put the hot water on, let the towel get damp the way you're seeing there, let the water cool naturally. And then when I felt like the seeds hadn't really sucked up as much water as I thought was going to make them chit, I hit it again with boiling water, and it was no problem. On the right there, you see, at least if you have access to a lab, you can scarify them with sulfuric acid. I think, having done it both ways, I would prefer to do it with the hot water, just because it's less dangerous, and it's not like with these seeds. I think the ones on the left, I'm trying to think if I planted those or not. The ones on the right were scarified that way to be done with micropropagation. So we did plant tissue culture with those. But I think we also did some plant tissue culture with ones that we did not scarify that way. I'd have to look back at my records, but I didn't notice an advantage to doing it with the acid scarification. So I'd probably leave it alone. According to Coit's and Thomson's records, they were getting a 60% take. They were always strongly recommending a ring graft, which is a double knife kind of grafter that they use in walnut stuff. And you're basically taking two evenly spaced knives, running them horizontally across the tree bark to take out a rectangular swath of bark, which you would then replace with a same, shape and length piece of bark that has buds on it. Bartlett and Tus, who are the guys from INRA in Spain who wrote that free PDF I showed you earlier in the presentation, they say that tea budding, chip budding, patch budding all work, but you got to do it when the bark is slipping. Timing of these things, I have noticed, differs a little bit from what the literature says, because Coit's writing, in the mid 20th century. Bartlett and Tus, I think they first started writing some of their stuff in the 90s. And again, all along, climate change is sort of making things wacky. So you do need to use your own powers of observation. But what I've noticed is that the kinds of dates this literature gives are creeping earlier in the year than what the literature says, because things are so much hotter. But the thing you want to look for, I think, is, as it is with a number of other species that we do grafting on, you want to look for when it's pushing new growth. And when you see that, that's your time to be doing grafting. Air layer is another thing. The tricky part with that is what makes, I apologize if you can hear the train horn. What makes Carobs so successful at resisting drought is the fact that it's not a fast grower. If it were a fast grower, it would have this huge need for water, because each new cell would need to fill its vacuole with water. So it's, a double-sided coin there. It's an advantage and a disadvantage. And one way in which that slow growth is a disadvantage is that if you're trying to do grafting, or if you're trying to do an air layer, the plant is not going to heal fast enough. For grafting, it's not going to heal as fast as you would like. And so that's one of the things that makes the take kind of not as good as you might like. And then with air layering, the problem would be that you want to keep it damp enough so that the tissue isn't drying out, but not so damp that it's becoming susceptible to fungal infection. That's a trick. You have to make sure, if you're air layering that that's a air layer you're going to treat, you're going to check frequently. There's not a lot of scientific literature not on Carob compared to other species, but that have been, around humans that long and that well known. But the one part of the scientific literature that there is a lot about is micropropagation, a lot about relative to what there is. And that's because of that take problem. Even though really experienced Carob growers, I've certainly seen videos on YouTube of them doing, chip budding and whatnot. I've even seen cleft grafts. But the videos don't go back, you know, in another couple weeks and in a month to show you how that same thing is doing. So you really don't know what their take is on that. But the literature is saying, look, as far as our commercial growing of carob in Turkey and in North Africa, we would like to find a more sure way of propagating these cultivars. So they're investing in trying to do better with tissue culture. I found, I was volunteering at a tissue culture lab, and they were kind enough for a short while to extend me the ability to experiment, both with initiating carob from explants, so just basically a chunk of tissue, and then, which is what you would do for clonal propagation. And then I was also trying to start seeds in culture and see how that goes. And your problem with carob is that it puts out a lot of phenols, and the phenols are a plant defense mechanism, but when it starts putting it out in tissue culture, it starts killing the plant itself. So that's the tricky part about it. How do you take care of carob? And all these caveats here. My experience with carob started going from street tree to street tree. So I didn't have to take care of them. They were just out there. I did start, I don't know if you can see me in the gallery or whatever. If you can, I will hold this thing up. I don't know if it's the background. You can see it maybe. I'll show you it later. I brought my, I have a potted carob here, which I rescued from a tiny seedling that I found in Riverside. And I've got, let's see how many others. I've got 2 others. The others I bought from Exotica Nursery. So, but my experience growing carob is in pots, which is not ideal for pretty much any tree, but I just don't have access to property, so that's the way it goes. So that's the caveat, is that I can't tell you what it's like to grow carob as a grower, as a professional grower, because I don't have that experience. And that experience is not tremendously well documented from what I've been able to see. But it is flexible in what it'll do. It is native to chaparral and garrigue type ecosystems. So it likes its soil on the alkaline side, but again, it's actually, it does better than you would think on, you know, it's a wider range than you would think. So I think it can go from like 5.5 all the way up to pretty high, you know, alkaline. It's obviously going to show some symptoms when it's not in its, you know, ideal environment. And certainly as far as the ones that I was growing up around, and a lot of the ones in Southern California, it's an adobe soil. So that's definitely not its ideal soil, but it does okay. You know, as long as you don't overwater it, you're good. But key to its drought tolerance is having a good taproot. So if you're starting it from seed, or if you're selecting one to buy, start it or buy it in a long container that preserves the taproot. And, you know, the first year or 2, you are going to need to establish it with water in a circle that's, you know, far enough out from the plant that you're not waterlogging it, but it can get some access to the water. And water it infrequently but deeply, because you want to send it down for the water. If you keep the water up on the surface, that's where your roots are going to be. So pests, how am I doing for time, by the way?
You're doing great. If you want to have some time for Q&A, we can start to wind things down and include that. But
yeah, we're getting towards the end here, so that's good.
Great.
Pests are going to vary according to where you're growing it, and the pests we have here in California are different than the pests that they have in the Mediterranean, and are probably different from the pests than they would have in Australia. But at least here, both from Coit's notes and what I noticed, you have to worry about rodents when the trees are young. So when you're trying to establish the trees, you need to put those little plastic things around the bottom of it. You can see on the right here, that's a carob tree that's in the parking lot at the Huntington. A lot of people don't realize about the Huntington Botanical Garden that the actual accessions for the botanical garden extend all the way out into the parking lot. So out in the parking lot, those aren't random trees. Those are, you know, accessions as well. And after a couple years of volunteering at the Huntington, I came to be known as the carob lady. And I finally had convinced enough people that they neglected this species that they bought 3 and planted them out in the parking lot. They did have their own. And in fact, Huntington himself had imported a Spanish cultivar called Casuta, which I really wanted to get my hands on. But again, because it's not respected, nobody really kept track of these accessions, and I never could track it down, anything but seedling ones there. But you can see on the right there, there's a mark there on the tree. The Huntington does have rabbits. It does have gophers. I'm not sure which one got at it, but the tree went from an upright, straight tree to sort of leaning over as a result of that. And it will be that way for the rest of its existence. So even though it survived it, it will affect how your tree grows. So do protect it when you're establishing your tree. When I was going to that grammar school that had that carob tree, you had no problem finding piles of carob pods on the ground. When I came back as an adult in middle age, you would never find carob pods there, and it wasn't because there were landscaping crews picking them up. It was because in the intervening years, introduced squirrels and then these feral parrots that also came there that weren't there when I was younger. Both of those have learned how to eat unripe carob fruit for the seeds, and that will definitely decimate your crop if you've got that kind of thing going on. I was able to collect pods like the first year of my study, and then we went into a big drought, and all these species were going at the carob pods like crazy, because when they're unripe, not only could they get the protein from these seeds from inside, but they could also get a little bit of moisture from the unripe pods. Navel orangeworm is probably the biggest problem that I witnessed. I'm pretty sure it wasn't carob moth, because when you look at IPM information for California, carob moth is mentioned a lot in terms of dates, but not in terms of carob. On the other hand, UCA and our stuff doesn't mention carob moth much at all. The reason I know for sure navel orangeworm is an issue is because Coit actually sent out some of the worms or whatever, really the caterpillars that he found in carob pods to the experiment station for an entomologist there to identify, and they were navel orangeworm. Navel orangeworm is a well-known pest on walnut and almond in California, so there is UCA and our IPM information for navel orangeworm if you want to apply that to any carob that you're starting to grow. Fungi, that is definitely an issue, especially if you're too kind to your carob. And so on these old trees, which were, all the trees I was seeing were from 80 to 100 years old, and a number of them had shelf fungus growing on them, which means that the trees are probably going to eventually be cut down by the city as a hazard, because when you see those on the tree, even though a tree can actually live quite a while with shelf fungus on them, but it's usually an indication that there's some structural issues going on, because it means the center of the tree is already being attacked. And the fungus, the shelf fungus itself is edible, so you're kind of getting a double crop there. Where can you get this stuff? This is the tough part, because again, because it's not particularly well respected, people are not particularly educated about it, and because it was disrespected, we lost that germplasm that were actually given, and then Esben Shade saved the germplasm and took it to Australia, but the phytosanitary exchange between California and Australia is really difficult. So even if you, as I have, contacted dailies in Australia, they're not going to send you any because the amount of money they would have to put into getting the phytosanitary certification, and then what you would have to put in on the other end, quarantining the carob, is just not something most people are willing to do. So with Exotica has a reputation of not necessarily labeling its plants for what it really is, but what Exotica has going in its favor is that it's very close to where Coit had this demonstration nursery. So it's kind of at ground zero for really good carob germplasm. So even if it's not what they've labeled it to be, it is likely to be better than your average carob street tree that you find randomly in California. Papaya tree claims to have Santa Fe. I got on a list. I was on the list for like more than a year, and he finally, let me know that for one reason or another they didn't have it. But I know that he has access to it, so you can check in and see if he's doing any better with that. Rolling River in Oakland was just starting to make seedling carob available at the time that I was finding out about them, and now I think they're actually doing a fairly good trade in just the seedling carob. Pearson's is also in Vista. So again, even though it's seedling, it's probably superior germplasm. And then if you want larger lands, you know, like I said, carob is slow growing. So the carob you see in that photo is taken from Exotica, and I actually bought that one at a ridiculous price. And I still own that tree. And it's now like it doesn't have one thick trunk or anything like that. And it's about 7 feet tall. So partly that's because I have it in a pot instead of the ground, but partly that's also just because it's a slow grower. So if you have a landscape, or if you wanted to do double duty, you might want to buy from Moon Valley, which will sell you much larger carobs, but you won't get that, you know, taproot advantage you would get if you were planting from seed or planting really small. And let's see if I got any other thing. Yeah, that's it then. So yeah, certainly open for questions.
All right, so I will pull up some of the questions. There's been some early on, so I will go through that.
And I apologize that you're missing it. Well, you're missing one aspect of the talks that I give is that I always bring examples of the food, and I bake something ahead of time, and I do apologize because it's missing that aspect of the talk.
The sensory experience. Well, thank you so much, Megan. I just want to give a lot of gratitude to you for taking the time, and I know you had a lot of preparation for this, for backup systems. I know you've got a lot going on up north with the fires. So I really appreciate you making the time to be here and sharing your wisdom and experience with us and all your research. Let's see if you can see that plant there. It's kind of hidden by the background.
Yep.
Nice.
I went looking for one of the parent trees that Coit mentions in his notes, and unfortunately, like more than one tree when I went looking for the parent tree. This one is probably under a freeway now, but this one was growing, this little seedling was growing in a parking lot not far away, and so this is probably about a 3 or 4 year old. It was about 2 inches high when I planted it.
Okay, questions. So we had some early on. Let me see here. Feel free to type more questions in the chat window, and I'll get to those as I kind of move through the list. There's a lot of chat this time around, so it's
okay. Well, that's fine.
All right, so there was a question on pod ripeness. So yes. Green and soft, or brown and hard? What would you
green and soft. If you're a parrot or a squirrel, you can do green and soft. If you're a human, do brown and hard.
Right.
Basically, it's like a lot of other fruit, which is that when it's ripe, it's going to abscise, which is it's going to be easier to pull off the tree. If it's hard to pull off the tree, it's not ready yet.
Right. Okay, we have a question on keeping carobs small and still getting fruit. You have any thoughts or feedback on that?
I don't have personal experience with it, because the one that I bought from Exotica that you saw in the picture there, and I bought that one in 2014. It flowered for the very first time this year, and I don't know how old it was when I bought it. It was probably at least 2 years old when I bought it. And unfortunately, the conditions that we had, because I was right in the middle of a move, it got transferred, and it spent a day in a U-Haul truck heating up and stuff. So it was not ideal conditions, and I did not get fruit from it. So I am hoping that I can get fruit from it. I can tell you from the other stuff I'm growing in pots, which is a lot fussier than carob is, that I do get apples and I do get cherries, and I do get, from all the other trees I'm growing in not particularly big pots. So my assumption is that as long as I can keep, the pests away from it, that I would be able to get fruit off of it. The bigger the pot, and especially the deeper the pot, I would say, the better you're going to do. But it's really adaptable. I didn't have pictures of it in the presentation, but there are people who do carob as bonsai, and that's very shallow soil.
right?
Now, they're not necessarily trying to crop off of that, but it survives okay.
Well, if you think of maybe other Mediterranean fruits like pomegranate and fig, definitely containerized ones, and olives, definitely seen all those containerized and small producing fruit. So it might be in line with that.
And you know, I think that's one of the things that CRFG is really good at, which is that people are willing to experiment with stuff, you know. So not that there's a ton of really great, with the exception of that, you know, free PDF in the English language, I don't find lots of really good authoritative information about Carob out there. But even, you know, in that book, it's not taking it from the perspective of the home grower, you know. So even if somebody were telling you it could only do this, you know, CRFG people are constantly doing things that, you know, you're quote unquote not supposed to do with something, and it turns out that you can make it work. So I guess the one caveat I would give is that even though carob is an enormously drought tolerant plant when it's in the ground, remember when you've got it in a container, you are going to need to water it more, but you also need to make sure you're, again, not overwatering it. One problem I experienced with one of the ones I potted up myself, instead of, because when I got them, they were very small liners from Exotica, and I ended up having to pot them up. And I ended up using kind of standard potting mix, which was that had like too high a peat content. So it's the kind of thing where it gets hydrophobic when it gets dry at all. And I wasn't watering it constantly to keep the peat hydrated because I was trying to train the tree not to be needy, right? So then what happened, and I didn't discover it for a really long time, was because even though I was watering it, you know, at least twice a week in very hot Southern California at the time, it was starting to get, you know, dry, like dying leaves. And I was like, what's going on here? And I pulled it out of the container, which is just a used sort of trash can, literally like a used kitchen trash can. And I found that the water was only coming in on the sides, and it would run down the sides because the rest of it had become hydrophobic. So you need to make sure, if I were planting that over now, I would probably use cactus mix with just like a little bit of regular potting soil mixed in there. Something that is really more like the kind of calcareous soils that like I said, it can grow in adobe in the ground in Southern California, and it does. But if you're growing it in a container, you know, grow it in something like closer to what it's used to.
Okay. Other questions? There was one mention of someone in West LA, in the West LA chapter, having their parents had several carob trees that have been there since the property was developed in the 60s. There's no development prior to that. Avocado groves as well. How can I find out what kind they are? I don't know.
That's the problem. You know, think about, like, we only just started doing stuff like that with apple, which is one of the most widely grown species in the world. To be able to do that kind of testing, you know, genetic testing, somebody had to have invested in testing those markers in the first place, and practically nobody's done that investment in carob. So you're never going to be able to get a genetic test of that. Basically, the only way I can really for sure say this is what this is if there's a really well attested provenance. You know, there has to be a physical record of it. So I would really just, if you got it there and it's fruiting and you like it, you know, just enjoy it, you know. I mean, you can, what I do in my records in terms of observing these plants is that, let me see if, I don't know if the virtual background is going to mess up things so that you can't see it, but let me see if I can get the light to show it enough. Carob has compound leaves, and on this example here, like on the leaf that I'm holding, there are 6 leaflets. And carob can go from, it's rare to see, but you can sometimes see 4, all the way up to about 12. And on a given plant, once it's mature, it'll tend to average around whatever that thing is, right? That's one of the things you can tell a difference between a particular seedling one and another. So, you know, one of the ones I have in my garden averages 8 to 10, and this one right now is averaging 6. So that's one thing to look for in terms of telling them apart. When it flowers, how long the racemes are, things like that. So if you can find somebody who has a well-provenanced cultivar and can give you what those stats are, then you can compare the stats on yours to that. Although the bloom time may vary if you're talking different locations, but the raceme length and things like that, and certainly the amount of leaflets per leaf, that would be a little bit more of a hint. But again, you know, it's just like, it's not a particularly, not a lot of work's been done in it, not a lot of people, and I think the thing that two things I want to emphasize here is that I think carob's really great and worth growing, and this is with people putting that little work into it. So imagine what it would be like if people actually bred it. If people really went about picking superior versions of it and breeding them together, what could you come up with if you put the work in? And then the other thing is the role that CRFG folks can play, which is that if you've got your trees in West LA there and you think they're good, you know, you can start offering that. You know, I don't know if your chapter has a greenwood exchange, but start experimenting with grafting, start experimenting with carob propagation, and start making selections through the state, because that's how Santa Fe was come up with in the first place. And Australian Carrot Company is making some good money off of Santa Fe right now, because they know how to appreciate what they have.
Did you say that was from Santa Fe Springs? Was that the Santa Fe?
Yeah, it's not from Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's from Santa Fe Springs, California. And I did look for the parent tree of that, because because that would have been a great, you know, like, I know I have Santa Fe here, not somebody's just telling me it's Santa Fe. It's under a freeway.
Yeah. Okay, we got some other questions. When you were mentioning the leaflets, is it a member of the Fabaceae or the bean and pea family? So
yes,
that
it
means
is.
It is
Yeah.
nitrogen fixing as well?
No, it doesn't. Not all Fabaceae are nitrogen fixing.
Okay.
That's a common misconception. There are a lot of Fabaceae that do, and that was a really important thing for me to try to answer, because again, as I said, there's a lot of hearsay on the internet. But I was working with some researchers in France who are researching the microbiome community around carob in both Mediterranean France and also North Africa. And they have not yet found any indications that it's fixing nitrogen, which is too bad. But I mean, there is some like sort of off chance it could be in a way that we haven't noticed it. So the traditional Fabaceae thing is that if you have a symbiotic relationship with a soil microbiota, it's going to form a nodule on the root. But in 2017, a paper came out from Alan Van Danes and his team here at UC Davis, as well as their collaborators at University of Wisconsin in Madison. They found a maize landrace in Mexico that does nitrogen fixing in the air by creating a mucilage around the brace roots of the maize. Now, that's not a nodule. That's a different way of doing nitrogen fixing. There is some sort of long shot that maybe carob's doing something like that, but it's probably not a mucilage, because when I handle carob, I'm not seeing, like, you know, carob boogers.
Interesting. Okay. The root system, is it very aggressive to keep away from the house or sidewalks?
No, not in my experience anyway. It has that reputation of, oh my God, it's lifting up the sidewalk. If you do what they did in Southern California, which is they planted it initially as a drought, you know, resistant plant, right? And then later, when suburbs came in and lawns came in, they started watering it 3 times a week, shallowly, right? Not one deep watering per week, but a shallow watering. Of course, they started getting roots at the surface, right?
Right.
But the problem, even with that, is that if you're doing that, you know, you continue doing that 3 times a week shallowly, what's really going to happen is that your carob roots are going to start rotting. So it's not at all like fig like that. Fig is much more of a, sort of the environment's, I mean, it is a Mediterranean plant, but the kind of environment that fig grows in, although it's tough and flexible, it likes a lot more water than carob does. Or somebody was asking me to put up another, to repeat a slide I had, and I didn't see which it was because I only saw like a little thumbnail of that chat.
I haven't reached that yet. There's 22 messages
Okay.
down below what I'm scrolling through, so bear with me for a sec. We did have Kirk, who's out in Upland, offering pods from some of the street trees around his neighborhood. So
great.
Message Kirk if anyone's out
And that's
that way.
another thing a chapter can do. We're getting to carob season right now. I mean, it's hard to do because you're not doing in-person meetings, but let's say somebody wanted to do the collection and hold, well, of course the mail now is a problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
You could like sort of create little boxes and put envelopes in and number the envelopes and have the chapter rule in on like what do I think is the better tasting, better experienced carob, and then you're
Right.
partly helping to identify what are your better trees that you have in your neighborhood.
Right. And you had provided links that we can provide to folks for purchasing through Azure Standard. Is that correct?
Yeah, Azure Standard. I mean, even if I didn't give you the link, if you just put Azure Standard in Google or whatever, you'll find it.
And they have a product that you recommended by the Australian Carob company. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, they have a whole line of Australian Carob company products. They carry other things as well, but I do think that the Azure is, at least as far as if you can buy the kibble, definitely buy it because you're getting 6 or 7 of the better, sweeter varieties of carob, and you can actually taste. They won't send whole pods here, possibly because of phytosanitary issues, which is too bad because you won't get those seeds.
Right.
But that's, make your trip down to San Diego County because you can get superior germplasm down there. But the kibble it's actually nice. I actually like eating it just fresh, so you can order that from them.
Okay.
And they also make they make a very good. They developed, I don't know whether they did it with Australian Carob Co, but Azure came up with its own brand called Uncommon. So it's called Uncommon Carob, and they make chips and quote unquote chocolate bars. And of all the stuff I've tasted since that we could get in the US since El Molino went out of business, that is the best quality carob so-called chocolate that I've ever tasted. So I would recommend that as well, and I would go with no sugar added. That's what I prefer.
I purchased some of the bars as well as the chips and the mint and the unsweetened, and I'll try it out. So if other folks want to hop on board, we can do an online tasting or something.
I just saw somebody's note here. Yes, they do have some carob in Mexico. One of the wineries down there in Ensenada, their carob orchard was actually planted by Paul Thomson himself.
Nice. How big can the trees become?
Again, there's a little bit of seedling variation, but they're not totally huge. They grow to about 30 feet, if that. But, because they're slow growing, it's going to be a while before you get to that 30 feet.
Right. And do squirrels and possums eat carob?
I don't know about possums. I've never seen a possum eat it on the ground, but they're kind of like mostly nocturnal, so I wouldn't have seen them. But certainly squirrels do. Both fox squirrels and gray squirrels will eat it. They do it while it's not ripe yet.
Okay.
And I think that's just because it's not like squirrels have a hard time eating hard things. They can go through walnut shells and they can go through macadamia nut shells. So I don't know why they choose it when it's still unripe.
Same with the pecan nuts. They get them green. Don't know why.
Yeah, it might be that it keeps off competition because other species might not be able to handle the tannins, and they seem to be able to.
Yeah. Do the trees shed leaves year round or entirely in the winter only?
No, they are.
They're evergreen, right?
They're evergreen, so
right.
They just kind of lose it when the leaf is hatted is when it loses it.
Okay. Papaya Tree Nursery has a carob tree in their parkway that was mentioned. So if anyone's looking to grab some pods.
Yeah.
Um,
And try to be politer. They're gonna like make it so that you can't do that anyway. Don't ruin it for everybody else.
right, totally. Someone says they've been interested in carob's fire tolerance, and a study from the island of Cyprus said carob groves survived major fires. Do you know if there's any data on why a carob's fire tolerant, and does it have high internal moisture content or something else that keeps it from burning?
I'm actually interested in seeing substantiation of that. I was keeping my eye on that because, again, it was one of those things that I would see printed as if it were fact without really good citation. So if somebody that's mentioning that actually does have the DOI number for that study, I'd be very interested in finding out. But my impression is that it's probably about like what oak is, which is that, you know, it doesn't go up as fast as say pine does, but it's not inflammable. I mean, it's not that it can never be set on fire, you know? So I don't know.
Okay. Let's see. So your favorite cultivars to eat fresh off the tree? Do you have any?
I haven't had the luck of being someplace where I could, that, you know, I know that I'm actually pretty shy when it comes to doing that kind of thing of like, you know, going house to house and like, you know, and that kind of, if I had to be the person saving old orchards, you'd be in trouble because I'm way too shy to do that kind of stuff. So the closest I've ever gotten to that was when I was Exotica and I was buying what they had labeled as Santa Fe. And having heard their reputation, I was like, how do I know this is, you know, where did you get this from? And they took me to a mature tree in the back and I sampled some of the pods off the tree at that time, and it didn't necessarily convince me it was Santa Fe, but what it did convince me was that the pod was good enough quality that if it came, you know, if it was actually propagated from that tree, that I was probably in decent shape. So if I'd been more assertive, I'm sure, because they sell Sfax, they sell Teleria, not that I knew that at that time. They probably have a couple other named ones there that I could have compared, but I just haven't been anywhere where I've had that many cultivars available at the same time that I could compare.
Someone wanted a brief explanation of the scarification process in
Sure.
more detail if possible.
It's actually a lot. I mean, I literally winged it. And I mean, not literally, I winged it. I didn't, there's very good methods and protocols when you're doing micropropagation because that's scientific literature, so they'll tell you what you have to do, right? But when it comes to sort of garden scarification and stuff, because carob isn't, you know, obscure to people, nobody's really written that down very well. So I just kind of made it up as I went along, which is that you use a knife, or to be safer, you could use a nail file, and you just file off enough of the seed coat that you can get down to something where you know, don't file too far into the endosperm, but so that you can see that the seed coat is disappearing. And the reason you do that is because you want the water to have easier access to rehydrate that seed material, because those seeds have to plump up before they're going to start germinating. And because I think carob comes from this sort of fire ecology, just like we do, it's not literally the kind of thing that has to be fire scarified, but it is tough to heat. It is tougher, it's able to take it. And so I was using boiling water simply so that I can get something that is, you know, the seeds when they're ripe, and especially if you're not harvesting them the moment they're ripe, but like if you got a seed that a tree that has a high resistance to abscission and it doesn't have a lot of pests nearby, you could have as many as 3 years of crops on that tree, right? And the only reason you're going to be able to tell the difference between them is what the water content is in that thing, which starts to look the same after a while, but you'll also be able to see like by how much crap is hanging onto the pod, like bird shit or other stuff, you know, because the pod's been there a while. Otherwise, you would not be able to tell the difference between how old that pod is. If it's been on the tree 3 years, or if it's been on the ground 3 years, there's not as much moisture in that seed as there used to be. And so that's why I was using hot water, is because I'm trying to drive the water into that seed. And you need some patience. It's going to take a while for it chits. I did use I've done it both with and without, but it works better with. If you have a little, you know, sort of horticultural heating pad, or you could even use like, you know, your sort of one you would use for your bed even, almost, you know, if you want to, as long as you can keep it from getting too grody or wet. But some kind of bottom heat. And as soon as they chit in the towel, then, you know, put them into whatever soil you've selected. I think it would work best if you you sterilize the soil. So if you have a way of heating the soil such that you can kill off any fungal stuff that's in it, because that's the most vulnerable moment for the carob. If they're out there on the ground, obviously there's tons of bacteria and fungi and stuff in nature, right? They'll germinate. It's not going to be a problem. But you know, the moment you try to do something in this sort of cultured environment, it doesn't work that way because we've got very imbalanced fungal and microbiota stuff, so it doesn't work quite the same way. So you're going to be safer if you sterilize your soil.
Okay. Do you use tools to crack open the dry pods? And they're asking to explain or demonstrate the mechanics of opening and eating pods. Great question.
I haven't. You sometimes see pictures of pods that people have completely bisected. I have a disability that affects my hands, so I in no way have enough hand strength to do that and not lacerate myself. So I wouldn't recommend it. So generally what's happening when people are processing carob for home use, I use tin snips. And you can clip them with tin snips, and then you can sort of, you know, sort between the part that's the pod and the part that's a seed. You can put the seeds of pod and use use those. And then, you know, what you have left is what would be kibble if you had a kibbler. And you can either eat that fresh, or what I often do with it is use it to infuse rum.
Let's see. There was someone's asking if there's any carob t-shirts that they can buy, or something about you illustrating a carob t-shirt that they can buy.
I definitely have some ideas. I did make an Annonaceae design anticipating for the you know, the year of the Annonaceae, and I have that on Redbubble, but school has kept me way too busy to really do much with my ideas. I will certainly let people know when I have a carob t-shirt available. Okay. There are, just as I personally have been boycotting Amazon for like 3 years at least, but if somebody isn't doing that, I'm sure that there are all kinds of wacky things there. And I think I did once upon a time see like a carob iPhone cover or something.
Okay, do you think someone mentioned maybe it could be Rancho Santa Fe, which is close to Vista for the Santa Fe variety? Or would that be
no, I actually, the guitar that I showed you is from Rancho Santa Fe. But you have to remember that a lot of the cities that are super industrial right now, they weren't industrial when Coit was doing this scouting.
Right. Do you think the taproot can break through DG if otherwise well draining? Yep.
I think certainly it would go through it. I would just I wouldn't plant it in something that's 100% DG. I mean, it might do all right, because I think I've seen pictures of carob in nature that look like pretty rocky places, but it's not going to be ideal. So if you don't have to, why do that?
Right.
You know, make sure that you want something that's kind of like, it is free draining, but it at least has enough there that it's actually hanging on to water for a little while, which is what's going to give it that, because though carob is drought resistant because it doesn't demand as much, you do want there to be some in the soil.
Okay. There's a question regarding Orange Coast Community College and whether they have carob, or I don't know where the question was, but Charlie had asked that somewhere earlier.
I don't know about that. I do know that there are a number of schools that do have specimen trees somewhere on it. I think Ty showed me a picture of someplace. I know Pomona has some.
It's in Claremont, at one of the Claremont colleges.
Yeah.
I think it was Scripps or near Scripps.
And while
that's a beautiful specimen.
Yeah, the photo was really beautiful. I would love to go investigate that. UC Riverside, even though it got rid of Coit's accessions, you know, it regrets it now. It was asking me, you know, if you ever get the good stuff in, please let us know. But they do have seedling Carobs around at various UC Riverside locations. And even in Northern California, I think somebody said Dominican College has some too. So.
Nice. Nicholas had posted that he stumbled upon an old large carob tree in the streets of Tecate a couple weeks ago. Thanks for the presentation, and mentioned if you or anyone else interested haven't looked into or had a copy of the Lake Matthews and Gavilan Hills book by Kathleen Dever and Judy Whitson, he'd recommend it. There's quite a few interesting old photos and info about a part of the history part of the history of carob orchards in SoCal, including photos of the 50,000 carob tree orchards that Lawrence Holmes had planted.
Oh, well, that's good. I assume, is that part of that Arcadia publishing thing where they do the little books on various little small towns and stuff? Is it that type of book?
I'm
Okay.
not sure. Nicholas would have to respond on that.
Yeah, he did. He said
Okay.
yes. So that's good. I know to look for that now.
Great.
That's great. Yeah, again, I'm not on, for similar reasons, I'm not on Facebook and haven't been for 3 to 5 years. But when I still was on Facebook, there is a carob, I think it's called Carob Tree Project or something. And it's put together by I think he's a Turkish, a Macedonian Turk or something like that. But anyway, he got in touch with one of the Matthews descendants. And they've been, doing things related to that, so there are still Holmes descendants around, and they're actually still fighting over the eminent domain stuff on that land.
Interesting. So I'm curious to ask a question to the audience. With Nicholas, and I see Gia and Ula, are you guys all the same Holmes family? Yeah, so I guess we have.
Wow. So that's you guys. Well, hi, nice to meet you. Yeah,
Nice.
No, well, it's a real.
Cousins. Okay.
It would have been very interesting to see what would have happened if that whole orchard had remained the same way that it did. But the fact, at least when I last went there, which was quite some time ago, it was about 2014. Those trees were still there. So.
Where was this again?
This is out in Riverside County near Lake Matthews, what's called Lake Matthews.
Okay. Awesome.
He said he wants to, she wants to screen share something.
Yeah. One sec, Gia. All right, Gia, you should have the ability to screen share. You can put video on if you'd like, or any of that. Nice. That's great.
California.
That's awesome. So that's 7 leaflets on that. Nice.
Yeah. So it's 1 leaf, but there's 7 leaflets on that.
Good deal. Someone's asking to see the guitar.
I think there was, okay. I didn't know if that was this. All right. Let me look here.
And then someone had also asked for the link, and then we'll probably wrap this up here.
Okay.
The link to the book or the PDF that you had mentioned.
I don't, let's see if I can find it without having
Or if you can tell someone to.
Yeah, I think I'll email that to you, just because I would have to
Sure.
bring up some private stuff in my browser that I'd rather not have screen shared. So
can't be much worse than the Zoom bombing.
So
I'm just kidding.
all right. So if let's see. Can you see my screen here?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So let me see if I can maximize this or whatever to fit the slide. Okay, come on. Sorry about that. I'm just not.
That's okay. That's fine. You could see it there. It's gorgeous.
Well, I didn't want it to. If I hit play, I'm kind of afraid it's going to start forwarding automatically.
There you go. Nice.
So yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful guitar. I have no idea what it sounds like, but with an electric guitar, it kind of doesn't matter as much as with acoustic, what the wood is, because you're really just you're providing a background to have that big, you know, stock there.
Nice.
The greens and the colors in that are absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I do know up in our local mountains here in Glendora, there's a place called Bluebird Canyon, and they're doing some restoration work, and they're removing carobs that were planted a long time ago, simply because they weren't native, which I don't necessarily agree with, but
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
able to take some very large pieces of carob home.
Oh, nice.
So I've got, that's like maybe 6 months ago, so we still got a while to cure on that. But yeah, it looks beautiful from the end grain on it.
Yeah, it's stuff where I wish I'd been able to get a hold of it. I had when I started to get busy getting ready for grad school, so I started transitioning between it, and I wasn't able to volunteer quite as frequently at the Huntington. There had been a good break, and then I was walking through the area where I go to observe some of the carobs that they have left on the part of the property that isn't easily accessed by the public, although you can view it from the sidewalk. And I saw they'd cut, that a big branch had fallen down or had been cut down or something. And I was really trying to reach somebody to get permission to take it. And by the time that, you know, next time I went there, it was gone. I never could get a hold of somebody to get the permission.
Right. Totally. Someone just made mention that this is Rancho Santa Fe, which you did confirm. That's where the guitar was made, but the Santa Fe variety being
Is from Santa Fe Springs.
Santa
Yeah.
Fe Springs. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
The people who gave the tip on that, I think later owned a house in Rialto, but Santa Fe Springs is where the cultivar came from, which is why it's like laying under a freeway now, I think.
Gotcha. I remember John Valenzuela was telling the story of the Pettingill variety of apple, and that he ended up looking up online the Pettingill family in Seal Beach, and then Google Earthed their property and found apple trees in the backyard, and then went knocking on the front door. So
Yeah.
if you need someone to do that, I actually frequent the Whittier Santa Fe Springs area.
Good.
I can start checking under the freeway.
Yeah, I really curse that I was raised in a way that makes it like I get super anxious doing that kind of stuff. I think that kind of work is really important, but I am extremely ill suited to it. So I can be part of.
Okay. Well, Megan, thank you so much again. It was really enjoyable, and great to bring Carob into the light and out of some of that obscurity and into more respect. So.
Well, thank you very much. And if you have the ability from your side to save the chat, I would love to see it, because I'm sure there's a lot of stuff and, you know, tips and questions and stuff that I just never saw. So, you know,
Okay.
if you can bump the chat out to a text file or something, I'd love to see that.
I believe that automatically saves to my computer as a text file, so I'll send that over. There was a little Zoom bombing in there.
No, it's true. I did. There is that. Yeah.
Anyways, John, did you have any final?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again, Megan. It was wonderful, and to learn a little bit more about what they're doing down under as far as Carob is concerned. I remember growing up down there, we used to get cookies that were coated with Carob, and they were the best, well, biscuits we call them, but they were the best things ever, apart from Vegemite, but that's another story. You know, it's wonderful. You know, I just asked my wife, because we had some carob seeds down in the cupboard, and I said, "Oh, let's have a look. Where did they come from?" And she said, "Oh, I threw them out the other day." But they last forever. You know, once you know,
they last a fairly long time. Yeah. And you're also, I don't know about it now that we have that issue with the sort of mystery seeds that have sort of hit the news. So probably phytosanitary is going to start cracking down on seeds. But at least before, the one import of seeds, of carob material that you could easily do into this country used to be seeds. So certainly if you know people in Australia who have access to some of these, you know, they live in Bubaroi or Bura, or, you know, these places that have orchards, you know, you could get them to send you some superior seeds.
Yeah, well, and they've got that particular variety, the Santa Fe variety down there.
Yeah, they have Santa Fe, they have Clifford, they have, Wait, I think was one of Coit's, but I'm not dead sure. Coffin was one of Coit's. So they have quite a few Coit varieties there. I'm sure they also, they haven't identified on a site for me like which ones might be Australian selections. I would not be surprised if there are selections of their own. And then they, I'm sure, would have imported some from the Mediterranean as well.
And do they grow true to seed?
No, they don't. But at least as far as I know, they certainly don't grow clonally like that. But I think, as opposed to something like apple, you're much more likely to, it's a little bit probably more like mulberry, which is that you're going to get something that's got a lot of the good traits.
Okay.
So,
well, emailing is cheap, and if I get the link down there to them, I'll make some inquiries and see if I can't get something.
yeah. The real thing you need to do is make friends with somebody who's got the Australian phytosanitary export permits, because once you got that, you only have to mess with our side of it. So as long as you have some place to quarantine it for 2 years, you're good.
Well, yeah, I think, I can bring them through USDA because we've got all of those forms that you fill out to include with samples that you're bringing in from outside. So I think it might be doable. So I can at least try.
Well, if you were able to do that, it would be a huge service, because USDA ARS has been underfunded for quite some time. And then there's the fact that I've literally had people laugh at me when I say that I study carob. So when you have that sort of attitude problem, it makes it difficult. But it's definitely something we ought to be investing in. And honestly, when you look at what Australian Carob Co. has done with it, that could have been us.
Yeah.
And that could have been us on lands that you can no longer grow some of the other species on because they're too sensitive by comparison to carob.
Yeah, well, knowing me, when I was up at Daly's, I actually had some of the pods, and I know I spat the seeds out and put them in my hand and put them in my pants, but they've probably gone through the washing machine about 3 times by now, so I don't know where they are.
Carob's pretty tough, so you might succeed for all you know.
No, I nearly broke my teeth.
Right. Okay, so we have a little group starting here, by the way, of folks who want to do a carob tasting. So if you want to order carob products, we could do in September a Zoom meeting where those that have tasted or just want to watch people taste the carob can do that together. So
it's definitely the right time of year to be looking for fresh carobs. So this, you're going to start seeing pods from now all the way into October, depending on when those trees are fruiting. And if you work with the San Diego chapter, North San Diego County particularly, because they're in 2 different chapters there, the North San Diego chapter would be near, like, as I said, kind of ground zero for good carob. So if you're able to work out a trade with them, make sure they send it in insect-proof bags, though, because the likelihood that those pods have navel orangeworm or something in them is not small.
Right. Okay. Good deal. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks for coming through, Megan.
All right. Well, thanks again. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we'll have the recording up within the next week, and I'll share that with you, and then we'll cross-post that on YouTube for folks. And thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to the Holmes family for representing. I don't know if Megan, you caught that photo of Nicholas in Riverside.
No, I didn't get to see that. I only saw the California thing. I didn't get to see.
Gia, if you're still on, would you screen share that again? This was Nicholas in front of a tree in Riverside. I don't know if Gia's still on. Yeah. Let's see if they're able to post that. But yeah, it was a photo. It'll be in the presentation too on the video. Okay. But yeah, good times with an old tree from Riverside at the original property. So
yeah, it's great history.
There we go. All right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I did. For some reason I was thinking there was something about the context that made me think I was going to be seeing like a vintage photo of the Holmes orchard.
Right. No, this is
Excuse
in
me.
2013, home in Riverside on Dufferin with one of his original carob trees. So,
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
good deal. All right. Well, thank you,
Thanks very
everyone.
much.
Have a great evening.
All
Yep,
right.
thank you. Appreciate it. Take
See you
care.
guys.
Be safe.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
Okay. Just gonna.